Now, turning to our program, please welcome Kathy Clark, Managing Partner at Kathleen Clark & Associates, to introduce today's speaker.
Height adjustment. Greetings, everyone. Some years ago, my friend Beth Heller invited me to join her at a Rotary luncheon. As a third-generation Rotarian, Beth impressed upon me the value of civic service in the company of good people. A few years later, I became a Rotary member. One of the things that hooked me was that fellow Rotarians of goodwill and good works actually made good things happen. Another was the four-way test, which is listed behind me. And for those of you not familiar with it, I ask you just to take a look. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendship? Will it be beneficial for all concerned? It's known as the 24-word moral compass for decision-making, both personally and professionally. Finally, I was hooked because it was an opportunity to learn and serve our community, both local, national, and beyond. I became aware of Final Five voting, as did many of you, with prior programs here at Rotary. One that featured Catherine Gale, co-author of The Politics Industry, How Political Innovation Can Break Partisan Gridlock and Save Our Democracy, and Sarah Eskridge, which many of you will recall was the executive director of Democracy Found. I became curious about how it worked. I wanted to know how it worked in other places and how it could improve our experience as voters. And I wanted to know how it works in a practical sense. I sought out more information on Final Five voting last year, and that's when I met the wonderful leaders and volunteers here who are in attendance with us today. And in the spirit of the four-way test, please join me in welcoming Rich Ng, co-founder and CEO of Voters First Wisconsin.
Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of all of us at Voters First, I'm very pleased to be here. It's an honor and a privilege to share with you today about Final Five voting. Let me start by asking you a question. How many of you think that Congress is working? I'm shocked. Okay, nobody, right? Yeah, kind of a rhetorical question, right? In fact, you're not alone. When you look at kind of a recent survey done by Pew Research in February, the top issues that aren't being addressed by Congress, really came to the top here. You can see that the role of money in politics, 72% of people think that it's bad. The affordability of healthcare is something that affects people. Inflation, the budget deficit, right? Nothing is being done here. But the biggest thing that struck me that I want to share with you about today is the fact that in the top five, people don't think that Democrats and Republicans have the ability to work together, right? Shocking, I know, but something that we need to address. So before I get into how we might fix this, I want to just give a little bit of background on myself and how I got started on this journey. So Voters First, we started this together with my wife, Lena, and we're longtime Wisconsinites, been here for over 30 years, in the early 90s. I've got three grown kids and a little fur child, a 12-year-old cockapoo. But I've spent over 30 years with GE Healthcare, and I'm an old school conservative, right? I still believe that truth matters and character counts, but I hate politics. You can see from many faces in the room that maybe you share that same sentiment. I don't mean policy. I love good policy, right? Because we need good policy to craft solutions. But I hate politics that doesn't call a spade a spade. I hate politics that doesn't tell the truth. I hate politics that when the team that you don't like does something, you're all up in arms. But when the team that you do like does the same thing, you don't say anything. To me, that is just uncalled for. And so when we saw what was happening, maybe about 10 years ago, I just started getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And Lena thought I was going to have a heart attack, and she says, "You need to stop yelling at the TV and start doing something." And so, I did that. And so we launched Voters First back in 2018. And eventually, I retired from G Healthcare in January of 2021. And, the whole point was to devote more time to Voters First so that we could make a difference and inspire hope that there is a way out of the situation that we face today. And so, what is Voters First? Well, we're a cross-partisan group. We've got conservatives like myself to progressives and everybody in between. But we take a very nonpartisan approach on how we want to try to solve problems. We're all volunteer-led. Small donations are what fuel our work. And we're 100% focused on Wisconsin. Pretty much all of us born or raised here have been a long time. But we understand that we are not alone. This is a movement that has national impact, and we want to do our best to play our part to help facilitate that. And we have a very simple vision. We believe that good candidates lead to good governance that lead to good society. I'm not just talking about good in the sense that you're competent and capable. I'm talking in the sense that you're also a good person. You have character, you have values. That is what will get us to the good governance and the good society. And our mission is very simple. We want to fix our broken political system by ending corruption and electing uniters. And the way we do that is by finding common ground to solve our common problems. All right? So as we got started into this, we said, okay, what are the things that can help make a difference in this political environment that we face today? We came up with 4 key initiatives. The first is, tied to the very thing that rose to the top of the list in that Pew Research survey, was money in politics. So we'll be advocating for the accountable, responsible, and transparent use of money in politics. The next thing that we work towards is, look, how do we find the balance of having both security and access for voters in our elections, right? We want people to be able to vote, but we want people to be able to trust the system. So much trust has been eroded, and to the extent that we can play a role in rebuilding that trust, we want to, do our part to act in good faith. But third thing that we focus on is on nonpartisan redistricting. I'll talk about that a little bit more. I believe many of you here in Wisconsin know what gerrymandering is. It is a scourge in our political system, and we need to address that. But today, I want to share mostly about Final Five voting. Okay? So, Final Five voting is really a simple 2-part change. Now, many of you have just participated in a Final Five voting election for our favorite pies. If you had the chance, you might have seen an email that came out earlier this past week to vote for your favorite pie, a single vote, where the top 5 would advance to the general election. And today, many of our volunteers showed you a QR code where you would be able to rank the top 5, and we will find out a little bit later in terms of who is the winner. So Final Five voting is pretty simple. You've heard this before from our friend Catherine Gale and Sarah Estrich. It's really a 2-part change, right? So the first thing is you have a combined all-party primary where every person, they just vote for one candidate. You pick your favorite candidate, okay? So on the screen, I picked candidate 4. That's my favorite. And then after the primary, the top 5 vote getters advance. And when they advance, we now utilize a technique called instant runoff voting. That is what you did on your phones when you arrange the pies in the order of your preference. It's very simple. Most of us make these kind of ranking decisions every day when you think about what cereal you want to buy at work. And in this case, you can rank up to 5. You don't have to rank all 5, but here is how I ranked these candidates here. So very simple. Did anybody have any problems doing this? Okay, pretty straightforward, right? I know this is a smarter than average crew, but we always want to make sure that this is something that can be adopted by your average everyday voter. Now, the key thing to understand, and I want to pick up the conversation where Catherine and Sarah left off, is why does Final Five voting work? Okay, here's why it works. If you look at this little chart here, this represents the 435 seats in our U.S. Congressional House of Representatives. So we have these seats that are solidly blue on the left and solidly right on the red. In fact, 364 of them are what we call safe seats, whether it be by natural selection or by gerrymandering. No matter who runs in the primary, you know that either Team Blue is going to win the 175 safe seats, or Team Red is going to win their 189 safe seats. Okay, so what that means when you have a safe seat is that the election that matters is not the general election. The election that matters is the primary election. Now, when you look at primary elections, one of the things that is helpful to understand is that the primary electorate is maybe a little bit different. And this is just a tendency. It's not true for everybody, but primary voters, they tend to punish collaboration. You probably know people, maybe more on the extreme end of things, who just don't like the word to cooperate with the other side or to collaborate with the other side, to find win-win. They prefer maybe to dominate, to conquest, and that is just kind of the way it is in our political system today. And so what happens is when you have that type of mentality, you end up electing people who don't want to work together, who are more extreme, and you can see this representation on the screen. You see on the left, as you head farther to the left, that's the more liberal side, and if you go to the right, you see the more conservative side. This is a great tool that shows where each of our 435 House of Representatives stands in terms of ideology. What do you notice about kind of these two curves here? There's no overlap. Overlap is where you have the ability to find common ground, right? To make deals, to be able to do good for the broader electorate. It does not exist in our US congressional system today. And that's a function of, because, hey, primary voters, they don't want to collaborate. They pick people who tend to be more extreme and we're going to win and we're going to win all the way. Now, contrast that with general election voters. What do general election voters want? Well, they want the government to solve those 5 things we shared on the first slide, right? They want affordable health care. They want inflation down. They don't want money in politics. And they want Republicans and Democrats to work together for the good of all the people, right? So general election voters reward collaboration. And when you do that, and we go back to a time where we weren't as polarized, this is a chart from 1979. It's a whole other talk, but our change in our political system really began in late 70s, early 80s to where we are today. But you see these overlapping curves of people on the representatives on the left and representatives on the right. There was plenty of space in the middle to find a way to broker a deal, to be able to do good things and find legislation that works for all Americans. And so when you compare our current election system, called first past the post, to Final Five, the election that really matters is the general election. And so this is good, because Final Five voting, it now incentivizes politicians to pick a new boss. Their boss is not the primary electorate. Their boss is now going to be the general electorate, the people who vote in the general election. Because if you look at the ideological composition of US voters, you see on the chart, it's kind of a bimodal distribution, right? But there's overlap. It's a very similar overlap to what we used to have. And in that space, again, there's room to maneuver, room to be able to actually solve problems. And one thing that Final Five does is it makes that representation of our representatives much more reflective of what the actual constituent base looks like. All right, so what are the problems that Final Five voting solves? I think in 3 categories of people, politicians, and parties, it solves these things. First of all, for the people, hey, you don't have to have a fear anymore of voting for the lesser of 2 evils. I mean, has any of you ever had that feeling that, I got to pick one of these 2, I don't have much choice? Now, that's something that many people that we talked to, they felt that. With Final Five, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You've got 5 choices. Second thing is no more fear of a wasted vote. Some of us may be independent or in a Green Party or a Libertarian Party, right? We're not all on Team Red or Team Blue, but many of the people in the smaller parties or the independents feel that their vote might be wasted because they're thinking like, well, my vote doesn't count. I can't really vote my conscience. I just got to pick, who might most likely win. And that's not the case in Final Five. You don't have to worry about a wasted vote anymore. Less negative campaigning. Our negative campaigns today are kind of a result of the fact that you've got 2 people running, right, primarily. And when 2 people run, you got the, people who are donating all these money to campaigns that just launch negative attacks against one candidate. Well, now with 5 candidates in the race, you got to really decide, where's my ROI? Is it going to be attacking one candidate? Is it going to be in attacking 4, and I got to pony up $4 more or redistribute the $4 that I have to just pick and choose one candidate? So our hope and theory of the case is that Final Five will lead to less negative campaigning. And another benefit here is with Final Five, you will get better governance and better representation. With the politicians being able to be freed up to solve problems rather than just making negative sound bites against others, that's going to do nothing but help the people and the issues that they have at hand. Now, if you're a politician, look, there's some benefits for you with Final Five as well. The first thing is you don't have to worry about being primaried anymore. You guys ever heard the term primaried as a verb? Right, many have. Okay, some probably have experienced it here in the room if you run for office. Right, this is the idea that if you're running for office and your base doesn't like you, you could be attacked from your ideological flank because you're not, quote unquote, conservative enough or not, quote unquote, progressive enough. But hey, if you're doing Final Five, and especially if you're an incumbent, you've done a halfway decent job, you really shouldn't worry about being primaried anymore. Another thing that stands out for Final Five is there is a greater opportunity for new candidates to play. I'll show you a story at the end, but more people will run for office when they understand that they don't have to be the top choice of their party. They just have to be the top 5 of everybody's general elections preference here. A third thing is that if you're a politician, instead of focusing on campaigning all the time and constantly, starting 18 months before the race of talking about what you're going to do, you can actually govern. You can work across the aisle to figure out, okay, how do I make solutions? Because you're not worried about the primary anymore, right? And finally, for the parties, if you're a party, one of the things, particularly in Wisconsin, that the parties hate, both sides, is the fear of crossover voting. This is when Democrats vote in Republican primary or Republicans vote in the Democratic primary. I mean, it really irritates the party leadership when you do that. But here, you don't worry about that. We're all in the same primary. All the candidates are there. You don't have this issue anymore. Now, you can still, if you're party leadership, you still identify your party with, the R, the D, the I, whatever. Everybody has to make an informed decision, so you know where they stand in terms of general, not specific, but general alignment with the party. And you can still promote your preferred candidate. The major parties can still have their independent caucuses. They can tell their folks, hey, who they want to win. But they might have, in 5 races, you could have 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, an independent, libertarian, or a Green Party person, right? The mix is dependent on which district you're in. So all of these things are good. And maybe the last thing I'll say on the party is you don't have to worry about the spoiler effect. So now, if you're a conservative, typically here, at least here in Wisconsin, you're Republican, you hate the Libertarian Party. If you're a Democrat, you kind of hate the Green Party. Why? They take votes away from you, right? So much hair pulling, so much anguish when these smaller parties, they might get 1 to 3% of the vote. In a close state like ours, which is very purple, that makes all the difference. And it just makes the parties pull their hair out. With Final Five, you don't have to worry about that. All right, so big benefits to all the major people involved here with people, politicians, and parties for Final Five. All right, so how are we going to make this happen? Well, in Wisconsin, the only way to make this type of change is through the legislature. So we've got to find a way to persuade Madison on the benefits of Final Five and why it's good for everybody. So our general approach on how we do this starts with, really motivating and mobilizing 4 different groups of people. The first group needs to be the grass tops. So these are the leaders, the business folks, the CEOs who have relationships with our legislators and make sure that they begin to understand and have conversations about Final Five and how it can help and how it can address the issues facing our polarized political system today. And as they begin to do their work, we have to mobilize the second group and second and third groups of people, which are these groups. We start to mobilize the grassroots. We educate them. We work with organizations like the Rotarians to share about Final Five, great civic, faith, service, and community organizations that can listen and reach out to the members and say, hey, we want to share with you something that can make a difference. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And finally, at the appropriate time, we want to pull in the media, the influencers, both on the traditional and the new media side, to be able to make our case that Final Five is important, because at the end of the day, we have to persuade really these people. We need to persuade whoever's in the majority, the party leadership, right? Nothing goes to committee until the party leaders agree that it goes to committee. Well, after that, we got to persuade the committees, right? And usually there's a committee in the Senate and a committee in the Assembly that we have to persuade. And then it's a matter of getting the votes. We need 50 Assembly votes, and we need 17 to break that 50% mark. And finally, got to get through to the governor. Right? So this is our journey, and this is why we're mobilizing the forces to be able to pass Final Five here convincingly. So what have we done so far, and what's the path to passage? Well, last term, we did a lot of good things. We hit all of our legislative goals. We actually got the bills introduced in both the Assembly and the Senate. We were able to have the bills assigned to the elections committees in both chambers, and we had public hearings. And that was our goal. We knew it wasn't the right time to push for passage yet. We need to kind of circulate this because Final Five is relatively new. A lot of people need time to digest and understand it. And so we're going to continue to allow that time for digestion and understanding this term. So in the 2025-26 term, we're not going to introduce the bill. We're actually going to just spend most of our time on raising public awareness and gaining support from the communities, even as we have private conversations with the representatives. There are 34 new either state senators or Wisconsin Assembly representatives this year. It's a huge number, okay? A lot of it happened because we had different maps this year, but big bolus of new folks. They haven't heard about this yet. We need to have a good, meaningful conversation with them so they understand it and they can begin to realize, okay, is this good for them? Is it bad for them? They can process that before we push for passage. And what we have to do is next term, we have to push this for passage. So if we can get this done in the next term, this is kind of the path, the runway that we see to be able to enact Final Five voting in Wisconsin. All right, so now the moment you've been waiting for, we need to see what is the favorite pie. All right, so Tracy, are all the votes tallied, all the votes in? All right, can we get a dramatic drum roll, everybody? All right, here we go. Let's see how things worked out. So we had 97 votes. We have, in round one, so let me explain this. You have the 5 candidates, right, that made it out of the primary. Now, in Final Five, you have to have a true majority, right? So with 97 votes, you have to have 49 votes in order to reach a majority. So this line right here is the magic line that any winning candidate must cross. So in the lead right now, we have Apple Pie with 35% of the vote, followed closely by Keyline. So in the spirit of Final Five, you drop the candidate that had the least number of votes, and you take their second place votes and distribute them according to their second place preferences. So who is the candidate that gets dropped in this case? Strawberry rhubarb, correct. So we see strawberry rhubarb gets dropped as we head into round 2, but these green areas are votes that were distributed. So 4 people had apple as their second place vote. We had 4 people had coconut cream as their second place vote. We had 2 people had key lime as their second place vote, and 1 person had pecan pie as their second place vote. Has anybody made it to the finish line yet with a true majority? Not yet. Okay, so what do we have to do? Who gets eliminated here? Okay, it's a close tie, but it's coconut cream. So coconut cream, I was rooting for coconut cream, but I guess I'll have to settle here. So now coconut cream is gone. We've redistributed their second place votes. And apple gets 9 of those second place votes. Key lime gets 7. And pecan pie gets 3. In round 3, has anybody made it to the 50% line yet? No. So we got to go to the last round. And in the last round, apple crosses as we redistribute the pecan votes to apple here. So let's round of applause for apple as the winner. And I do have to talk with Saz about election interference. I see they were serving apple pie for dessert, so that was not planned. We'll have to work on election integrity, but that's another talk. All right. So look, I've waxed eloquently now for 20-some minutes about the theory of the case behind Final Five. But I want you to know that it's not just theory anymore. There's actually a state that uses Final Five, has used it multiple times, and I want to let them share their story, okay? So I want to let Senator Kathy Giesel, who is the Republican majority leader of the Alaskan State Senate, share what her experience with Final Five is. Quick background is she's a long-time Republican. She did not like Final Five in the beginning. She was actually very much against it. But after she lost an election the old way and came back to win the election with these Final Four in Alaska, she became a believer in the power of Final Four, Final Five voting. So let's listen to what she has to say about what happens here.
What has been your experience with Final Four voting in Alaska? We know originally you didn't like it, and then you came over, and tell us that story.
So I decided to run again in 2022 when, again, the seat was open. And I won significantly. The primary I won, which of course was an open primary now. There were 3 of us on the ballot, 1 Democrat and my opponent and myself. I won that primary, not by a huge number, but the top 4 go forward. So all 3 of us went forward to the general election. And in that election, I also won on the first count. But in Alaska, you have to achieve 50% plus 1. And so it went to ranked choice. It went to the ranked choice tabulation, and I won by double digits. So that was my experience, right? And I came back into the Senate, and we in 2022 formed a bipartisan coalition in the Senate. So we had 9 Democrats and 8 Republicans. 17 out of the 20 of us said, let's all work together. We also had huge changes in other elections where more moderate Republicans and more moderate Democrats won election, which made that bipartisan coalition very easy to form. So we've had a bipartisan coalition those 2 years and now again. In our House, the State House has 40 members. This year, for the first time, 21 of those House members are women. We have never before had a majority of women in one of the bodies in our legislature. Again, the result of the ranked choice voting, the final 4, and then ranked choice voting general election. So that's been our experience here. They have a bipartisan coalition this year in our State House. And so it really feels like a great achievement to be able to have more moderate voices in both of these bodies and to actually be able to meet together, talk about policies, talk about goals to bring Alaska forward. We were able to pass balanced budgets, not spend from savings, actually have some surpluses, even in very tight years. Now this year it's even more tight. We'll see how we come out this time. But we also are really moving forward things like election reform, looking at our retirement system to make it more equitable, policies like that.
That's great story, Senator Giesel. I mean, just to work together, it sounds like this new system incentivizes that type of collaboration, would you say?
Yes, yes, yes.
Read into that, but clearly she is a believer now. And I want to just highlight some of the wins that she saw. First of all, they were incentivized to work together. I mean, I don't know how many people knew that Alaska is ruled by a bipartisan majority caucus. Anybody know that? Okay, a few people. Right? They are the only ones in the state. They have actually both chambers now. The Senate and their House is a bipartisan caucus. And it's interesting, right? I only shared a 3-minute clip out of the much longer interview that we had with her. But she told us that, look, she came from a party of like 11 Republicans. And in our polarized system, 4 of the Republicans did not want to play ball. They wanted to dominate. They did not want to collaborate and work together with the Democrats. So she and 4 others decided, look, we're going to work with the Democrats because all 9 Democrats wanted to work together. And so they made the more extreme versions of the Republicans just kind of, okay, you're going to be the minority party, even though we both are part of the same party. So this is, I think, pretty amazing in terms of the power that Final Five can bring. Because normally, if you did something like that and you didn't have Final Four, what would happen to you? Word that starts with P, right? You get primaried, right? They don't worry about that anymore. One thing she didn't mention, but she mentioned in the broader interview with us, is they actually have cross-party endorsements. Because in Final Five voting, your second and third and fourth choice matter, right? You saw that as we went through the apple pie journey. Every vote matters. Okay, so they're like, okay, I don't want to bash the other person I'm running into. I want to say, hey, if you're a libertarian and I'm a Republican, you want to vote libertarian first? Hey, that's great. But I want to earn your second place vote, right? Because that is how you win in Final Five. And they've actually got more things done than they've ever had before. She said it's like the most productive legislature she's ever seen. They've been able to get budget surpluses. Right? What was one of the things in the Pew Research first slide I shared that people care about? The debt and deficit. Well, Alaska has a surplus. So that's huge to be able to do that. But they do other things like election reform. They're working on the Alaskan retirement system. Right? That's a hot button, right? Look at Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We don't want to touch these things. But they're taking on bold issues in Alaska because they have that bipartisan majority caucus enabled by Final Four voting. Another things that she mentioned was that the indigenous folks, particularly in rural Alaska, they feel much more represented with Final Five, as well as actually seeing young women, being inspired to run and to win. I find it pleasantly shocking that out of the 40 people in their house, 21 of them are women. That's the first, right? I don't see that happening anywhere else but with the power of Final Four and Alaska's situation. So I want to kind of leave you with this. Look, we have a long journey ahead of us, and I need your help. And the best way that you can help us pass Final Five is by connecting us with other civic groups. If you have connections with other Rotarians in Waukesha, Ozaukee, Washington County, or anywhere else in the state, we would love to be able to have the same opportunity that you have so generously shown us to be able to share about the power of Final Five and the hope that it brings. The second thing is, some of you are wonderful, wonderful, very smart business people. If you have any marketing expertise, we'd love to have a conversation with you, chat with you about, hey, how do we multiply our efforts? How do we reach out to much more Wisconsinites to get them on board, explode our growth to be able to get people on board with the power and the hope that Final Five bring? Okay, with that, let's open it up for some question and response.
I was sorry my favorite key lime pie didn't do better, but it was a good example, so thank you.
I'm with you, Mary. Key lime, right? Thank you, Rich, for a great presentation. I'm curious about your relationship with, if you have one, with Democracy Found.
Yeah, so Democracy Found is our partner organization. They are the lead organization for Final Five. So we work closely with Catherine and Sarah. Sarah has moved on to a different role. So Linda Katz is the new executive director of Democracy Found, and we work very closely with them. Great question.
Hi there. Glad to hear from you today. My name is Alan Witt. So I've been involved with elections before where they stack the vote, so they'll put two not good candidates against the one they want to win. What would prevent someone from doing that here? How do you avoid that where you could have four not so good candidates with the one person, pulling the strings? Because it seems like that could happen.
Yeah, it's very possible, right? In Wisconsin, as long as you meet the ballot access requirements for signatures, you can run. But the beautiful thing about the primary is, hey, you're still going to pick the top five. It'll probably be more than just those top five running, right? In Alaska's case, the first time they did this, you know how many different people ran in their primary? Like 41. So you're going to have lots of choices. And each candidate, as they make the case for themselves, as long as they can make it into top four or top five, they're going to be able to win and let the general election sort it out. So I think it's okay if they try to do that because it's really hard to gain. Great question, though.
Thank you for coming today to tell us more about this. I think it's a great idea, and it's something we need to move toward as swiftly as possible. Hans Weisgerber.
Hans?
I'm curious about what election night looks like when the polls are closing, what this looks like. You were just showing the multiple rounds of vote redistribution. It seems like that's going to have to be done to make it clear to the voters and people sitting at home to figure out if their candidate won or not, that each round has to be presented. I'm just curious how that looks in Alaska, or if you're familiar with what that looks like, how that shows up on John King's magic wall.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Hans. So each state will probably look a little bit different because they have different laws on like when they can start preparing ballots, when they can start counting them, et cetera. Alaska has laws where all the ballots have to be sent into Juneau in order to be able to start counting them. So sometimes votes come in from dog sled in Alaska. So it'll take them a little bit longer than, say, Wisconsin. But that said, yes, Alaska has decided to be very transparent about how they do things. And so round by round, they go ahead and they share the results of each round. So you know when you've reached 50% of round one, but they can only get it after all the votes have come in, right? There might be some refresh, but they've chosen to be transparent, which we applaud. And that's how they make sure that there is trust and integrity within their election. We won't have as many challenges like that in Wisconsin because we can tally our votes faster. There was a bill to try to get a Monday count bill. If some of you are familiar with that would have made things easier for our clerks. But net, I think we will have an easier time than Alaska in doing this.
Hello, my name's Antoine Carter. Personally, I'm a Steve Warnacki guy, but we'll go from there. You mentioned earlier that this process helps voters go from voting who they think would win to voting who they want to win.
Yes.
Has there been any reports or case studies or from the voters' perspective that support that claim?
Yeah, so great question, Antoine. I'm not familiar with studies that directly support that claim. I just know that it makes sense that you don't have to worry about your first place vote, but that would be an interesting study that we could suggest to groups like Institute for Political Innovation to try to answer that question. We do have, on pretty much all the studies show that it is simple. It is no more difficult than the traditional first past the post voting, but I don't know about the Canada thing.
Thank you for being here. I'm so curious about this. Tina Owen Moore. I'm the Chief Officer for the Office of Board Governance for Milwaukee Public Schools. So I'm curious to know if you have seen any of this working for like positions on internal boards, president, vice president, that kind of thing. We had quite a hotly contested seat for those in this last election, so I'm just curious to know more.
You know, it could totally work for those situations. In fact, I tried to make this work. I was a member of the Republican Party of Waukesha County. Really tried hard to persuade them on this. They didn't bite, but it could have totally worked for picking, you know, any office, right? Because it gives people what we say, nice cliche, more choice, more voice. So it'll work with any type of situation where you have more than two candidates and you want to present people with those options.
John Frankie. I don't want to be negative about what seems like a good idea, but isn't the party in power in a state, what incentive does the party that is in power in a state have to go along with the program that I think they will perceive as a threat to them, as undermining their majority? Other than doing the right thing, what incentive does the party in power have? And if it changes in Wisconsin, if there's a huge shift and suddenly we have a Democratic majority in the state, what incentive would they have to do something that might injure their ability to maintain the majority?
Great question. Wow, doing the right thing gets in the way of picking the right thing. How about that? Huh? No, you're right. So we have a challenge with the party leaders. It's not just the Republicans in our state. We see it happen in states like Nevada where the Democratic Party is not in favor of this because, as you correctly presume, they feel threatened by it. But what we try to do is tell them the advantages that this can provide them because they like to control the primary. They like to control the dollars. But we're telling them already, like, look, in Wisconsin, you think you control the primary already? You're not controlling the primary because, again, I'm closer to the Republican side than I am on the Democrat side. But we have crossover voting happening already. And it really, really irritates them. Like, if you want to fix that, do something like this where you put everybody on the on the same ballot. You won't have this issue anymore. I mentioned earlier about how they just absolutely do not even want to talk to libertarians, again, on the Republican side. This is like, hey, you tell the libertarians that you make the Republicans the second place vote, and now you have a completely different relationship, right? So these are the ongoing conversations we have to seed their minds with in order to make this work. One of the things that Final Five will absolutely not work for you is if you are dead set in the mind that I'm never going to collaborate with the other side, I'm never going to cooperate with them, then this is not the solution for you. But what I see is that, look, that's not the majority of the people, right? There's roughly maybe 30% of the people who are like that. But the rest of us in that 60 to 70%, we want Congress to actually get stuff done. And so I'm counting on those people to be able to speak up, to overturn the smaller 30% from that type of extremist thinking.
Hi, Steve Chevalier. I'm just wondering, I know this is your first priority, one down and 49 to go. But the question is on the money issue, your fourth issue. What is your long-term thought on how we get some of the money out of these elections? It seems like money runs the country.
Yeah, so that's a completely different talk, but just in short, there are many things you can do. There's kind of limiting foreign money. There's more transparency, and the end goal that we're working towards is the For Our Freedom Amendment. Okay, that's being led by a group called American Promise. But I'm happy to talk more about that afterwards. Okay, last question here.
Yeah, thank you, John Bauer. I can see how this works at the state level, but I'm trying to get my head around how this could function at the federal level, where the two parties control, who the candidates are in a national election, and how you'd get others to, get placed on ballots when those are controlled by states, but it affects a national outcome.
It's a wonderful question. Actually, our legislation was specifically for the 8 U.S. congressional seats in Wisconsin and the 2 U.S. Senate seats. So it's actually written for the federal first. The thinking of the case is we wanted to kind of make gradual change. Let's start with the federal seats and make sure that people have a good experience with that before we take this to the state level. So the presidential election will be more difficult, right? Because just for the nature of you got one person across all 50 states. We're not there yet. We need to do more thinking, but yes, that we're going to have to stick with federal and state first.
As we wrap up, how does the role of parties change or not change in ranked choice voting?
You know, we're all for parties, right? First Amendment, freedom to assemble. It's good to be able to coalesce around the values that you believe in. I think the parties can still continue to be, should still continue to strive to be healthy, to strive to have debate, to widen their tents, but to be true to their values. And they can back the candidates that they want to back. But I think a party also has to realize that not everybody within the party thinks the same. There is room for latitude, and that's part of the beauty of our political system is we should be able to have vigorous debate, whether it's intra-party or inter-party, and parties can continue to lead the way to do that. All right. Yeah. I just want to close with one quote that inspires me, right? So this is Senator Ted Stevens. He was a precursor a few terms back from Lisa Murkowski. Some of you may have heard of her. He had a great quote that said this: "To hell with politics. Let's just do what's right for Alaska." My hope for all of us today is that, hey, all Wisconsin politicians, after we pass Final Five, will say the same thing. To hell with politics. Let's do what's right for Wisconsin. Thank you very much.